radio crackled with a stark, unmistakable threat as a U.S. Navy destroyer moved through some of the most heavily watched waters on Earth. An Iranian voice, identified by Iranian outlets as tied to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, issued a command over an open channel: change course, leave the area, and do it now. Then came the line designed to cut through any ambiguity. Asterisk, he said, if you don't obey my order, you will be targeted out. Asterisk, the exchange, released and amplified by Iranian state-linked media, has ignited a fresh wave of concern that the Strait of Hormuz is edging closer to a shooting war on the water, even as diplomats struggle to keep a fragile ceasefire from collapsing on land. What's unfolding is not just a maritime confrontation between military vessels. It's a pressure campaign, a signaling contest, and a battle over narrative, where every radio call, every radar lock claim, every second of video becomes a weapon in its own right. In footage carried by Iran, Ian media, the warning is repeated again and again, as if repetition itself could force compliance. Astics, he said, last warning, last warning, last warning. Astics, Iranian coverage portrays the moment as a disciplined, decisive show of control. Iranian forces, it claims, confronted American ships at the mouth of the Gulf, trained weapons on them, and forced them to retreat before the situation tipped into catastrophe. The U.S. account, by contrast, says there was no retreat, only a planned transit under international law, part of a broader effort to reopen a mine-threatened waterway and establish safe passage for commercial shipping. Those two versions, both delivered with total certainty, cannot simultaneously be true and full. But they can both be useful to the actors promoting them. Iran's version warns that U.S. warships can be targeted quickly. The U.S. version insists it will sail where it has the right to sail without asking permission. And in between those statements sits the same row channel that carries a large share of the world's seaborne energy, now layered with mines, drones, coastal missiles, and political brinkmanship. According to Iranian reports aired on April 12th, two U.S.-guided missile destroyers, USS Michael Murphy and USS Frankie Peterson Jr., attempted to enter the Strait of Hormuz on April 11th. Iranian outlets framed the move as a deliberate provocation, a propaganda stunt meant to project strength, influence negotiations, and pressure Tehran. Iranian state media argued the operation backfired, claiming it was so risky that American crews only narrowly avoided destruction. Iranian reporting went further, describing what it said was a tightly choreographed ambush at sea. It claimed cruise missile batteries onshore and nearby platforms locked onto the destroyers, while drones and other assets monitored the ships in real time. It asserted the American vessels were given an ultimatum: turn back or be hit, and that they complied once they realized targ. Eating systems were trained on them. The rhetoric was dramatic, and the imagery was designed to match it. Voices over radio, ships shown at distance, the implication of weapons ready to fire. The point was not subtle. The message was that Iran can control escalation at the threshold, and that it is willing to operate at that threshold without blinking. In the Iranian broadcast, the American ship answers with a calm, procedural tone, emphasizing transit rights and insisting there is no hostile intent. The response comes across as an effort to keep the exchange from spiraling. He said it is transiting under international law and does not intend any provocation or hostile act. The U.S. side, as presented in the clip, also invokes the premise that de-escalation is supposed to be underway, pointing to the ceasefire framework and suggesting the radio threats are cutting against the stated goal of reducing tensions. But in the same breath, Iranian voices escalate, demanding a change of course and warning of consequences. If the Iranian version is meant to show dominance, the U.S. version is meant to show discipline and legitimacy. U.S. officials say the destroyers transited as planned on April 11th as part of a mission connected to mine-clearing operations and restoring navigation through the strait. American messaging described the movement as deliberate, not reactive, a way of setting conditions for opening a safe route. The U.S. military also pushed back against the idea that Iranian forces successfully compelled a withdrawal. One U.S. official briefed reporters that the ships crossed the Strait of Hormuz in both directions and were not warned or challenged by Iranian units during the transit. That statement directly contradicts the Iranian broadcasts, which are built around the idea that warnings were issued, orders were obeyed, and American ships retreated. That clash of narratives is now part of the confrontation itself, because the standoff, real-time and real world arrives at a moment when the diplomatic track has failed to deliver what both sides publicly demanded: a durable agreement that would keep weapons quiet and commerce moving. A round of high-level ceasefire talks in Islamabad ended without a breakthrough after roughly 21 hours of discussions. Hopes have been raised by the rarity and significance of direct engagement at that level, but the final outcome was a public collapse of momentum. The U.S. Vice President who led the American delegation described the talks as serious and substantive, but said no agreement was reached and argued the consequences would fall more heavily on Tehran than Washington. He said, "We have been at it now for 21 hours. The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement." He credited the host country's efforts to bridge the gap, but insisted that the core American demand was non-negotiable, a clear, affirmative, long-term commitment from Iran not to pursue a nuclear weapon or the means to rapidly obtain one. He said he would not negotiate details in public, but he drew a bright line around what Washington says it needs to see. Asterisk, he said, the simple fact is that we need to see an affirmative commitment that they will not seek a nuclear weapon, and they will not seek the tools that would enable them to quickly achieve a nuclear weapon. Asterisk and signaled that the U.S. had placed what it framed as its final proposal on the table. After, he said, "We leave here with a very simple proposal. That is our final and best offer." Asterisk, the optics of that moment, an American vice president leaving talks without a deal while warships test contested waters, feed into the same question now hanging over the region. Is the ceasefire holding because both sides want restraint or because they are repositioning for the next phase? The President of the United States, speaking as those talks ended, projected confidence and finality, repeatedly arguing that America had already achieved military victory regardless of diplomatic outcomes. He suggested negotiations were secondary, useful if they produced concessions, but unnecessary to confirm a result he described as already decided. He said, "We win regardless." He described an image of tankers moving, energy loading, and commerce resuming, then pivoted to claims about Iranian naval capabilities being wiped out, mines being dealt with, and American forces controlling the maritime picture. In his telling, the conflict had already settled into a U.S. advantage so overwhelming that any deal would be optional. He said, "Whether we make a deal or not makes no difference to me, and the reason is because we've won." But the waterway itself tells a less settled story. Even under a ceasefire framework, the Strait of Hormuz remains vulnerable to a single incident, one misread radar cue, one collision, one drone flight too close, one trigger-happy decision by an operator who believes a last warning has already been issued. And that's why the radio exchange matters. Not only because it may reflect what happened in one moment, but because it normalizes a pattern: direct threats, contested commands, and forces operating within visual range, each side daring the other to blink first. Iranian media messaging on April 12th framed the U.S. naval movement as reckless and politically motivated. It suggested Washington was trying to intimidate Tehran during sensitive negotiations, and implied Iranian forces were prepared to respond immediately and lethally if American ships pushed further. The reporting used terms like trap, high risk, and minutes away to create the sense that U.S. crews were walking toward a cliff edge and only backed off at the last second. The U.S. military framing was different in both tone and purpose. It presented the transit as an operational step tied to mine clearing and safe navigation, with the longer-term goal of restoring maritime confidence. It emphasized transit rights and the idea that international waterways cannot be closed by threat alone. That underlying dispute, who controls access, who sets rules, who has to ask permission, has always been central to Hormuz. But in the current crisis, it's become fused with broader issues: the status of the ceasefire, the demands over Iran's nuclear program, and the domestic politics each side is managing at home. And there is another layer: information warfare. The Iranian release of footage and audio isn't just documentation, it is an argument. It is proof of power packaged from multiple audiences at once: domestic viewers, regional allies, rivals, and the global shipping industry. Its goal is to leave captains, insurers, and governments with one lingering impression: your safety depends on Tehran's tolerance. The U.S. response equally is not just a denial. It is a signal to allies and markets that Washington will not accept a new norm where Iranian forces dictate where U.S. warships can sail or where calm. The Rusal passage becomes contingent on intimidation. If Iranian forces are indeed using the camera as much as their cannons, the U.S. is using its own language, planned as part of a broader mission under international law to frame the contest as one between coercion and rules. But rules do not stop missiles. procedures do not stop mines, and radio comm does not prevent a fatal miscalculation in a narrow strait. The immediate danger is not necessarily that one side is seeking a full naval battle tomorrow. The danger is that both sides are operating in ways that make an accidental battle easier to start and harder to stop. When one side says last warning, and the other side says it has a right to transit, the space for compromise collapses down to seconds and meters. It also raises the question of what happens next operationally. If the U.S. is serious about establishing a new safe passage and clearing mines, that requires repeated movements, persistent presence, and predictable patterns, exactly the kind of patterns an adversary can track and threaten. If Iran is serious about preventing what it sees as violations of the ceasefire, it may continue aggressive shadowing, drone presence, and radio challenges, exactly the kind of behavior that elevates the chance of a trigger event. Meanwhile, commercial shipping watches and waits. Any perception that Hormuz is one step away from open conflict will ripple outward through insurance premiums, rerouting decisions, and energy price volatility. The strait's strategic importance means even a short disruption can have global consequences. That reality is why both sides talk about safe navigation, even as they accuse each other of making it less safe. It is why mine clearing becomes both a practical necessity and a political symbol. It is why turning on a transponder or leaving it off can be interpreted as either transparency or deception. And it is why an exchange like this, voices on a radio channel, one ship in, the crosshairs of competing narratives can become a headline that shapes perceptions far beyond the water where it happened. For now, the key facts remain contested in public. Iranian media says U.S. destroyers were warned, targeted, and forced to pull back. U.S. officials say the destroyers completed their transit as planned, were not challenged, and were conducting lawful operations tied to opening a safe route and enabling mine clearing. What is not contested is that the tension is real, that the diplomatic talks ended without agreement, and that both sides are using maximal language to frame what comes next. A ceasefire without a deal is not peace. It is a pause, one that can end with a single spark. And in the Strait of Hormuz, sparks don't just flash.